Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and I thank you for stopping by the show this evening. There's not going to be, it's not going to be a super long show tonight, but we are going to try and cover some things about the Mideast, Russia, Ukraine, some issues that we're facing here at home, and hopefully we'll be able to do this in a relatively decent way. It's been a week or so since I've done my last episode. Wasn't feeling too hot last week, and there's been a lot going on aside from that. So hopefully we can kind of just step right back into the groove of everything and provide a pretty decent show for you guys here tonight. Thank you once again for everybody who's coming out to watch and support the show. I really, really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's kind of jump into it. So I know one of the hot button kind of issues or items that a lot of people have been paying attention to that happened very recently is the ceasefire, if you will, between Hamas and Israel, especially as it pertains to Gaza and everything that's happening over here. And I'm not really gonna. I'm not going to chew all of the different things that a lot of people have been saying to the best of my ability. But there is a subset of people that are like, for all the people who are talking about how terrible things were, why aren't you cheering? Why aren't you gleeful? Why aren't you happy that like all of this has come to an end? And I think most people really do. There is a shared sense of like hope or optimism at the fact that like supposedly all of this fighting has kind of come to a draw or a close, at least for now. And and they're trying to work through steps, but in the end of the day, like I think what a lot of this diatribe is really attempting to do is to really kind of circumvent or overshadow the things that took place. And I do think that when you look at everything that went on over in Gaza and everything that still occurs in Gaza as it pertains to the Palestinians, the Israelis, all of this, there is going to be this thing to try and utilize the ceasefire to overshadow everything that occurred between Israel and the Palestinians. And I don't think that's absolutely anything that we should just sit back and accept. We should be very skeptical. We should be very trepidatious about how all of these things unfold and how they move forward. Look, again, any cease in like hostilities where people die is always a good thing. But in the end of the day, it's only a couple days, right? It's only been a couple days. There's a fairly distinct pattern of these types of things being broken. And still, when you sit and you listen to a lot of the things that many people within the Israeli government say, like they still have claimed that, look, we haven't completed our objectives. There's still a lot of very, very hardline individuals within the Israeli government that still want to see these objectives dealt with. And then you have some of the rhetoric still talking about, going through and building up places like Gaza and really going through and really trying to redo the whole thing. And it's like, well, what does that look like? What are the next steps aside from the thing that has already been proposed, this supposed peace plan? And so there's still a lot of unknowns, and there's still a lot of things that, I think a lot of people are just jumping into it and they're just like, oh, like it's done. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And I still think we have to worry about it. I still think there's a lot of things that need to be worried about. There's still a lot of things that require time. They require patience. They require a decent amount of trepidation because, look, this is something that, it's very fragile still. It's in a very fragile state. And so to assume that all of these things, all of this is done, to assume that nothing will occur after this, to assume that nothing can happen after this, I think is also very naive. And this expectation that it's going to just magically just work within a few days of kind of evaluating events and all of these things. Like, look, you want to be hopeful and you want to be optimistic, but at the same time, we also fundamentally understand, how these things have worked in the past, and we fundamentally understand the patterns that exist. And so I think it merits stepping back, allowing things to kind of play out a little bit, and waiting to see how it actually comes to fruition. I think that's more important than just running gleefully into this idea that, like, oh, everything's done, hostilities are done, whatever the case is. I think we really need to allow this to bake and see what comes of it. So, it's not one of those things that I can say that I'm necessarily just jumping up and down about, because if history's shown us anything, it's the fact that patterns do matter, and current patterns that exist at this juncture. And you look at the rhetoric that's still coming out, not only from Washington, but also the Israeli government and so many other areas, is still somewhat very concerning. So it's still very fragile, and there's still the potentiality, that something could even go on with Hamas or whatever the case is. So, like, we need to allow this to have some time. That all being said, there is this idea, I think, also to where, and Trump kind of talked about this a little bit, but he's like, there's peace in the Middle East. I think that also yet very much remains to be seen. I think there's to assert that there is now peace in the Middle East, I think, is a very bold claim. I think it's one that, like, is run into with this idea of, like, I'm the great peacemaker, everything is settled, we don't have to worry about anything. But there's still these whispers about Iran. There's still these whispers about many other places. There's still hostilities that are taking place in the Middle East. There's still all of these different things that nobody wants to talk about. And not like, look, it's not just, simply like an Israeli thing, as it pertains to their government, but the United States is still very much locked into fighting and bombing and killing and destruction in the Middle East. And so as long as all of these things are still taking place, then this idea that there's this, there's peace in the Middle East, this idea that like, oh, now that this is done, all of these things just disappear. I really do think that it just becomes the situation to where it's like they broad stroke it with this paintbrush and want you to forget everything else that's going on. And, some people might be that naive, but in the end of the day, anybody that's paying attention to the events that are going on, really are seeing this for what it is still. And the reality of it is there's still people dying. There's still people being bombed. There's still a lot of other issues that have not been addressed. There's still a lot of issues that have not been dealt with. And as a result, to say that there is now peace in the Middle East, I think is not only overwhelmingly naive. I think that there may be a sense of, like, driving of the ego, and this idea to where, like, oh, because this one issue is, which it's not entirely solved yet. Again, there's phasing as it pertains to the Israeli-Palestinian issue, at more specifically Israeli Hamas issue. But it's almost like they're excluding so many other things that they don't want to talk about, because this is the cornerstone of what they want people to see. And as long as that's where the headspace is, and as long as that is where the disposition is, as it pertains to these issues, and this idea of, like, well, I proclaim it, so therefore it must be, it doesn't work that way. And a lot of people, have really become soured to that type of disposition. And a lot of the world really they don't buy that anymore. And when you look at a lot of American individuals now, there's been a great souring as it pertains to things that are going on in the Middle East and many other places. And so this idea that, like, we're just supposed to believe this, I think is absolutely ludicrous. Now, Middle East is not the only place where there's a lot of very proclaiming or proclamative type of rhetoric or behavior. The other area that we're starting to see is we're starting to see drastic escalations in some ways. And when I say drastic, I mean more so than what we've seen in probably the past few months, as it pertains to Russia and Ukraine. And this idea to where it's seemingly like, President Trump has started to just do this whole 180. There's not really this seeming drive to want to de-escalate anymore. There's this idea of wanting to escalate. There's been a lot of talks and a lot of whispers as it pertains to sending Tomahawks. But the other thing about Tomahawks is you either have to have some type of a submarine launched type of system, or you could have an aircraft launch system, or you could have a land launch system. But the land launchers themselves are very few and far between. And so there's this situation to where it's like, okay, how do you do this without the Americans being the ones that are either firing the weapon or in the very least providing the data or the intelligence to utilize that weapon? And furthermore, when it comes to Tomahawks, how is that going to be read? Now, I'm not going to say that I know or even assert, how people in Russia might read that or wherever else. But in the end of the day, when you start to introduce this and then you have this rhetoric that comes forward where Trump is like, well, maybe we'll give them the Tomahawks, maybe we'll not give them the Tomahawks, but either way, it's not going to be good, this idea that you have, and it's not only Trump, but you've had Hegseth have his diatribes on this, but it's this idea of if Russia does not concede, if Russia doesn't take this position of like, okay, we'll back off because of the Tomahawks, there is this rhetoric that really is implying now more than ever that, look, like the United States might get involved and they might do something. And they, it's a very like, I don't know if you would say like it's necessarily a veiled threat, but it's this idea of like, oh, like we'll get involved. And I really don't fundamentally understand. I don't fundamentally believe that even Trump has any idea of what he's really saying here, right? Like maybe he does, but you're seeing an escalation, at least in dialogue. We haven't seen the action yet, but we're seeing this in dialogue. We're seeing 180 degrees where, Trump just a couple of weeks ago basically came at this situation and was like, oh yeah, like Ukraine can 100%, they can take back their territory. They could do this, they could do that. And it really comes into question, when you look at the people that are providing this information to Trump, to the cabinet, to anybody that's relatively important. It's like, what information are they getting? Where are they getting their intelligence? Where are they getting their data? Where are they getting all of these other things as it pertains to the battlefield and the situation in Ukraine? And when you evaluate the situation in Ukraine right now, a lot of people bring up this talking point of, well, the Russians haven't taken much ground. Well, in the end of the day, when you're objective, and one of their primary stated objectives is the demilitarizing of Ukraine, that doesn't require you to have to always take land. It doesn't require you to have to take large swaths of land. What that requires is a level of attrition that is going to grind up and eat every single thing that you can throw at it. And in the end of the day, when you have this constant comparison of, well, they're not gaining ground, you have people that are missing the forest for the trees. You have people that are totally just set on this idea of what it is that they think the war should be fought in, and they're either willfully ignorant or naive, or they're unwillfully ignorant or naive, or they're just not listening, or they just don't care to listen to anything that's been stated up until this point. And so when you have these escalatory words and you have these escalatory situations, and it's not just the White House, but you have people in the EU that are also really driving this sense of escalation to where it's just like, we need more funding, we need more funding, we need more funding, more weapons, more ammo, more this, more that. And, it becomes almost like this hysterical situation or this hysterical asylum of people who've completely lost their mind. I mean, you're having countries that are stripping away like so many other things from their own people just to fund this war. And they really, you have these leaders that really just don't care. They're willing to throw everything in the kitchen sink there, despite the fact that it's just getting destroyed. And you're also having individuals within the EU that have been proposing sending their own people to go bolster, having boots on the ground, which a lot of people kind of, they grimace at, and then they start to walk away from that. But you are having a very trepidatious situation to where you're not seeing a real genuine attempt at de-escalation. You're not seeing a real genuine attempt at trying to step back from this and look at it with, adult glasses, if you will, but rather a situation in which Ukraine has to stand. They have to keep fighting to the last Ukrainian, all of these different things. Nobody genuinely steps back and says, you know what, like, maybe, just maybe, this is a situation that we have to recognize that Ukraine just simply can't win. When you look at the numbers and you look at the data and you look at the manpower parity and you look at the weapons parity and you look at all of these things, it becomes a situation to where it's like, at what point do you continue to feed this situation or this war, and versus looking at what is actually taking place and starting to consider whether or not this is a situation that is worth continuing to move forward on in this war footing. So it's genuinely concerning to see so much of this rhetoric and so much of this hemming and hawing about, like, perpetually just pushing supplies and all of these things in a situation that really, when you go back and you look at the origins, is historically and pattern wise, very much fraught with so many issues and so many, just corrupt situations. And you look at the way that 2014 went down. You look at so many other places since then, and you look at all of these different attempts to try and prop up this regime, and then you look at the cost. You look at the cost of what is going on between then and now, and you have to step back and ask yourself whether or not this is genuinely worth it. And the United States, whether it's the Middle East or whether it's Europe or wherever the case is, should not be involved in these things. And one of the key takeaways, and I've done videos on this, is this notion of entangling alliances. It's this notion of being involved with countries and having, a greater sense of favor, a greater sense of disdain or disliking of a country. This was something that we were vehemently warned against. This idea of having an over fondness for one country or another would ultimately drag us into perpetual conflict, drag us into situations that would destroy in many ways who we are as a country, and overall drag us into a situation in which the risk is, and it's usually always an accurate risk and it never fails, is the stripping of liberty and rights. And when you look at the conversations that have gone on around this, and you look at so many different entities that come forward and they say, well, we don't want you saying this about Israel. We can't have you saying this about Ukraine. We can't have you having this diatribe or this diatribe. And you look at all the people that have been taken off of places like YouTube. All right. I think we're back. Okay. So, man, that really sucked. Hopefully the connection holds out for just a little while longer. Let me know if you guys can hear this. Let me know if you guys and gals can still see everything, and let me know if it's still up for y'all. So okay, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna pick right back up where we left off. But look, essentially, this situation it's really kind of devolved into this monstrosity. It really has kind of turned into a situation to where not only is it a net negative for us as a country to be involved in all of these different these happenings, these entangling alliances, these places that we continue to fund, these places in these wars and all of these different situations that we continue to support time and time and time and again with our treasure and so much of our effort and our people, right? It takes everything away from us in order to support and prop up and essentially subsidize these different regimes. And ultimately, it's always going to be at the cost of Americans' liberty, Americans' rights, and ultimately to our own wealth, to our own treasure, right? It really, I can't stress this enough. Like you can go back and you can look at my founders warnings videos in those series that I've done so far, and I've talked about this at length as to why we cannot be embroiled, entangled, or in these situations whatsoever. The founders fundamentally understood the type of trouble that it was going to bring, the type of chaos that it was going to bring, and they talked about friendship, commerce, trade, goodwill as being the primary objects of what our foreign policy should be driven by, of how we should be conducting ourselves overall in the way that we can have effective diplomacy. They didn't talk about walk softly, carry a big stick. They didn't talk about bringing, the military into every conversation. They didn't talk about using aggression every other place. No, it was completely the opposite. This whole walk softly, carry a big stick mentality was not in any way within their thoughts. Now, they understood that you had to have a robust, they understood that you had to have a robust defense. That they fundamentally understood. But the key word is defense, right? The notion is being defensive, right? Not to gallivant around the globe and to start waging these wars, to be involved in wars, to support or fund or whatever the case is, all of these wars. And it certainly was not the primary object of what the founders fundamentally understood as it pertained to effective diplomacy and the way that you win and influence different situations and to bring people over to your side. Again, they talked about goodwill. They talked about friendship. They talked about, commerce and trade and all of these different things as being the primary objects of how to wage effective diplomacy, of how to have a good functioning way of foreign, what am I trying to think of? Foreign relations and the like. So, when we step back and we look at all of these different things that are taking place and this idea of, we got to lead with the military. We've got to show our strength. But the founders fundamentally knew that our strength was not the primary object being the military. It was the idea of showing people that liberty can win the day, that we are capable of being traders. We are capable of having a functioning, effective society, that we are capable of being a society that is governed by morals and virtue and all of these things. Those were the things that they knew is what strength actually was. Because anybody can carry a cudgel, anybody can carry a gun, anybody can carry some type of weapon and go forth and demand whatever it is that they want to demand. That they fundamentally knew that any person could go forth and do that and carry forth this this cudgel diplomacy. What they fundamentally also understood is that strong men Only strong men were capable of carrying forth a moral and virtuous society, right? And what are strong men made of? It's not simply just picking up the weapon. It's the idea of having values and principles and morals and all of these different virtues that made the founders who they were, that made this country the way that it was. And so this idea of walk softly, carry a big stick, and badger every single thing in your way if you don't get what you like is completely antithetical to the way that the founders fundamentally saw things. And again, it's not the fact, like a lot of people will sit there and they'll say, well, like, so what if you don't have defense? That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what the founders said. The founders were non-interventionists at their core, and they fundamentally felt that the most effective way of having foreign policy and dealing with people was not using the military first, was not using the threat of force first, but it was the idea that you could create goodwill, commerce, trade, friendship, and more by doing that, and allowing the liberty of our country to be the example and in our strength and our force, as opposed to diplomacy by the end of a gun. And so when we look at the way that we deal with other people, when we look at the way that our foreign policy is crafted today, when we look at the way that we, do diplomacy, quote unquote, so to speak, right? This administration, and it's not simply unique to this administration, but this administration in particular is very much taking this idea, this cudgel diplomacy of, well, if you don't like what I'm saying, and if you're not going to do what I say, then I'm going to beat you into submission. And that is antithetical. I want people to fundamentally understand this. This is not me saying this. This is going back and looking at what the founders understood. It was antithetical to how this country, the United States of America, was supposed to conduct itself. And you see people all over the world that advocate for this. And that's one of the things that I want to remind people of, is the United States did not become a country to be like everybody else. We were unique in the fact that we recognized liberty, that we recognized rights, and that we were to guard them jealously. We became unique in the fact that we set up a system that was unique, of virtuous men, of moral people, of educated individuals. And now we have become like the monkey in a circus or a zoo, that anytime that they see something they don't like, they wad up a lump of crap and throw it at people. That is what we have become. This is the situation that we have. And I'm here to tell you, it's not the way that we can move forward if we're going to expect to even have a reasonable sense of peace. They fundamentally understand, they being the founders, that if you want to mitigate threats, if you want to mitigate enemies, if you want to have a better standard of safety, if you want to have a better standard of foreign, that you don't go out and create enemies. You certainly don't go out and engage in other countries' enemies. You certainly don't go forth looking for fights or creating fights or being a part of fights. No, if a fight comes to our nation, we defend ourselves, and we do so adequately and with measure, right? But you don't go and start funding, aggressing, or being party to another country's wars. This was fundamentally understood. So when you look at the things that are going on in the Middle East, you look at the things that are going on between Russia and Ukraine, and not just those two spots, mind you, right? There's many other places. I haven't even touched on Venezuela tonight, but I've talked about it previously. I haven't touched about China, and I may or may not have talked about that previously. But the point is we cannot expect to move forward in this and expect things to work. We can't expect to move forward and have things turn out the way that we want them to turn out, because the reality of it is you don't always get what you want. You don't always get what you want, and that's no different for a country. You might think that you're getting what you want all the time, but in the end of the day, you're only creating more resentment and fostering more hatred. And I'm here to tell you, I think the foreign policy and the diplomacy, if you want to call it diplomacy, has been absolutely abhorrent. I think it's been repugnant, to say the least. The things that we have been funding, the wars that we have been waging. And again, if you want to understand how the founders perceived what war was, I do a whole video on that explaining the founders' views, right? So look, it's a very tumultuous time, and I'm not holding my breath, and I'm not saying that because I'm not optimistic. I'm not saying that because I don't think that good can come. I think that there is hope in the future. I think that there is good that can come in the future. But if we're going to do this earnestly and honestly, we have to start recognizing these patterns, and we have to start nipping this type of behavior in the bud. It becomes wholly destructive of us as a people. And I guess this is a good way to kind of segue into some of the issues we have at home. And I just talked about this recently, but this idea of sending the military into cities and utilizing cities as training grounds, like, look, granted, like, this was talk, but in the end of the day, we've seen some of what has occurred, and we've seen that there is a willingness and a propensity to use the military as a battering ram for every threat or every situation that comes across the president's desk. And when you have I'll say it, like, when you have a dummy and just a complete moron like Hegseth is, I think he's the worst possible choice you could have ever put into a situation like that. There's 100 other choices, in my opinion, that would have been a far more effective Secretary of Defense than Pete Hegseth. He talk about woefully underqualified, but I digress. I'll leave that to more seasoned individuals to go on about that. But the point is when you have people that are just going by the drumbeat, and you have people that are just going with it and saying, oh, well, it's perfectly okay to have the military, to use the military on American soil. This was a dangerous thing that the founders fundamentally understood. They understood it because they lived through it, right? They lived through it with the British. They lived through it with the oppressive crown. They knew what the dangers were by garrisoning troops in cities, and the effect that it was going to have, which is why they warned against it, which is ultimately why they didn't even want the military structure we had today. They wanted every person to be of the militia. That was the expectation. Who is the militia? All of the people, excepting a few political officers or public officers, right? That the whole body of the people was expected to be the militia. That was their understanding. That was the system that they had wanted to implement. And now we have a situation to where it's become so normalized, and people have become so used to this idea of using the military anytime that they don't get their way. I'm here to tell you, and I've said this before, it's presenting a situation that when Trump is gone, because he will be gone, right? Like, when he's out of the White House, what do you think happens? Now that the precedent has been set, what do you think happens when the other side, right? Because this is how so many people view it, is this side or that side. So if you're part of the one side and the other side gets in, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to use the same precedent, and they will use that the former precedent as an excuse as to why they're doing what they're doing. And so when you look at all of the actions, the way that we conduct ourselves with foreign friends or foreign enemies, if you will, the founders warned about this, that the instruments of war will eventually be turned upon the people themselves. So they fundamentally understood this too. So the expectation is already there. They totally expected that this would be the case if it got out of control. And thus we have a situation where it's become increasingly more out of control. This idea, again, of not solving a lot of these issues in a manner where there are more effective tools, especially tools at the municipal level. And I get it. Like, some people say, well, this police department doesn't do anything. This, sheriff's department doesn't do this. The officials in the city don't do this. And so I get that. And I fundamentally understand where you're coming from. But at the same time, if many people had taken the time to open up and see the history and read about how to change these things, we have the blueprints here. We wouldn't be in a situation to where you're having a sitting president propose pushing the military into cities. Now, I'm not saying it would never be proposed, but I'm saying, like, in this what we have, if more people understood who we are as a country and the mechanisms that we have at our disposal, and they took that power back, they retook their power back as people within this country, we could alter the fabric of all the things that are going on. So, I mean, there are numbers of recourses, and I've always said that I believe it starts within your own town. It starts within your cities. It starts within the places that you live, and working from there. And look, if a place, if I mean, there are other considerations, for your situation, but there's a lot of people that complain about how terrible things are, but then they're not doing anything fundamentally to try and change it. And they find more and more that it's just easier to complain about things than it is to fix things. And so when I talk about this idea of utilizing the military as a battering ram and using it in all cases, cudgel diplomacy, if you will, and then you look at the way that it's conducted here at home, right? All of these things can be worked on. All of these things can be addressed. But when you have a situation in which you have people that don't fundamentally understand their rights, they don't fundamentally understand their liberties, they've barely read the document, and then all of a sudden when you tell them, like, okay, great, like, let's get together and do something, let's try to change this, let's try to make a difference in our own town, and you set a time and you set a place and you do all these things, and then you're the only person that shows up, and all of these other people that complain about how bad things are, they don't show up. Therein lies more of your problem than just about anything else. And unfortunately, you can't, it goes beyond this idea of motivating people to want to make that difference, right? So when we look at different issues that we're facing here at home, there's a severe disconnect that is in existence where, people say that things are so bad, but then they don't actually get together with others to do something about it. And I'm not talking about simply just like joining a Facebook group or joining an Instagram group or going on X or any of that. And I'm also not knocking the idea that, like, you shouldn't have your voice be heard. But after a certain amount of time, you have to invest yourself into making those changes. Because when everything else fails, when your representative fail, when your mayor fails, when the town council fails, when all of these things fail, it is your time to step up. And it should have been your time to step up even when things are running good. That was the expectation that the founders thrust upon us, right? This was the expectation that was understood in keeping our societies, keeping the moral and virtuous foundations, in maintaining the principles, in maintaining the republic, in maintaining the rights and the liberties of each person. That was the fundamental understanding by the founders. As with not just a moral and virtuous people, but an educated people, a people that were educated. And I'm not talking about going to a college. I'm not talking about going to a university even. Understanding what your rights and liberties are, understanding the foundation of this country. These things are fundamental to preserving your towns, your cities, your states, your country. So when you look at these different issues, when you look at this mentality of wanting to just use a battering ram for everything, not just in the foreign light and as it pertains to foreign policy, but then you see those same things start to come back overseas, into our own backyards, and you start to treat everybody, or you start to treat one segment of the population as the perpetual enemy, or you start to do all of these different things and treat Americans in a way that is unbecoming of our founding principles, it creates a very drastic situation. We still have situations where, there are First Amendment issues. We still have situations to where people, you have calls for people being canceled because they don't have a positive reflection on or they are questioning things as it pertains to Israel or Charlie Kirk or Ukraine or anything that doesn't necessarily go with what the left or right story is, right? Like, you have these situations where you have people that are clamoring and saying, like, these people shouldn't be able to say this. These people shouldn't be able to do that. This is hate speech, or you can't say this against Israel. You can't say this against the current government. And unfortunately, for all of those people, I'm here to tell you that all of that speech is part of free speech. All of these things, all of these opinions, people have the right to say, whether they're disgusting or not. And look, I don't like reprehensible conversations. I don't like hearing people say just disgusting things about other people or other individuals. But in the end of the day, these people have the right to say it. And when you start advocating or making laws to basically, ostracize and isolate these people from society, you are doing a disservice to who we are as a nation, right? This is fundamentally antithetical to who we are as a nation. You don't have to like it, but look, it's not there for you to like. As a matter of fact, I would much rather hear something reprehensible come from another person, so I know where they're coming from, so I know the type of person that they may be, than to have them bottle that up and then just carry it around and not say anything at all, right? This is a very trepidatious situation. It's a very slippery slope, if you will. And we have to be very cautious about this. We have to be very cautious with the way that, we conduct ourselves in terms of law and order as well. Because it's not only just simply a First Amendment issue, it is a issue as it pertains to your rights and liberties, to all of these different things. And when you look at how people, I don't really know the best way to say this, but like, when you look at back during the riots, after the whole George Floyd debacle and going into the Rona, I remember seeing videos of unmarked vehicles, and I'm not talking about the ones that were importing individuals, but I'm talking about the vehicles in places like Oregon, for instance. I believe it was in Portland is where some of these videos came out of. But you had individuals that would come out of these vehicles. They were masked, they had kit on, and they would snatch some of these people off the streets. And supposedly a number of these people were Antifa people, right? And you had people that were praising it. They were just like, yes, like, this is what we need more of. Like, we need to have these people snatched off the streets, just dragged into a van, and then this van or this vehicle just drives away by a bunch of individuals, allegedly, part of either the federal government or the local PD. It was hard to tell sometimes, but when you have this type of behavior and you're cheering this on, and the government sees you being like, yes, we need to do this. These people should not be allowed to exist. And we don't care what happens, and just throw the book at them and it doesn't matter. That is a very, very dangerous precedent. And so when we're moving ahead and we look at some of these protests or these riots or all of these different things, you have to fundamentally remember that these people still have rights. They still have the right to due process. They still have the right to to a fair and speedy trial. They have a right to a jury of their peers. They have all of the same rights. And you have people that are just overwhelmingly praising it. And today you're seeing the same thing. And when the Democrats take power, because eventually that tide will shift again, you will have the same people that were praising this type of behavior by government entities, like just aghast at the fact that it's happening to them. And you would think that the arbitrary nature of the way that they went after people over January 6th would have woken people up to this. But instead of using ration, instead of using reason, instead of jealously guarding your rights and liberties, what you ended up getting is a people who only wanted revenge. They wanted their opponents to be treated the same way. They wanted their opponents' rights and liberties deprived because it made them feel good. And now, in the end of the day, now that their team is, in power and they have the ability to, okay this, it becomes a situation where you ultimately just have two parties that are using the government to cudgel one side or the other. And that is the other issue that we have here as it pertains to whether it's the drug war, the protests, riots, freedom of speech, firearms issues, right? Like there's a bunch of different firearms related issues that have come up in recent weeks, right? So you're having this situation to where you have these sides that are arguing for arbitrary government power. You have these people that are arguing for masked government individuals to go and snatch people off the streets or to show up at people's doors or whatever. And it really it really becomes it's really just disgusting. And it's so antithetical. And these are the same people that will turn around and be like, yeah, but I love the Constitution. These are the same people that'll slap a "Don't Tread on Me" flag on their truck, but don't fundamentally actually care about whatever it means. They don't fundamentally care about what's in the Constitution because they just use the Constitution as a crutch to try and make their arguments, even though the Constitution may very well contradict the very things that they say that they support. And so when we look at issues, especially as it pertains to free speech, the ability for people to freely trade or do commerce or do business, as we've seen recently, and so many other issues, whether it's the crackdowns or the sending of military or law enforcement into neighborhoods or different cities and towns, look like this is a very drastic and dangerous situation. And I'm going to shift over to another point here as well. We still have not gotten the fundamental truth about Epstein, right? We still haven't figured any of that out. I don't know that I may ever see the results of this in my lifetime. Perhaps, if I have kids, hopefully, they might find out the truth then. But I don't think we're going to see that in our lifetime. And the reason for that is, like, if everybody's dead, then you can't possibly send them to jail. So they just get off scot-free anyways, right? There's no punishment. There's no justice that's being served. We still don't know the entirety of what took place with Charlie Kirk. There's still a lot of things that really just don't seem to make sense. They don't seem to add up. And it's a tragedy. Both things are tragedies, right? And that's just two of so many other instances that we don't have answers for. We don't have the full picture for. We don't have, earnest investigations. The people that have been doing the footwork were the same people that were doing the footwork with the Las Vegas shooter and so many other incidents. The average person that were filing FOIAs, the average person that was taking the time to go back and look at so many other things. And it doesn't mean that every single one of these people were right, but when they're outclassing in some ways the government apparatus, and it doesn't seem like the government apparatus has any incentive to tell you the truth, as they've shown via their patterns, and they have more of an incentive to cover themselves than bring the truth or the people to justice that were involved, then what are you left with, right? What are you left with? And so there's so much that has been mishandled. There's so much that I think has been purposely covered up. There's so much that I think is in the dregs of corruption. Whatever happened to the entirety of the two guys that tried to shoot Trump, right? All of these different things have just been like accepted, like within a week, just like this is the person, they did it, this is how it is. As shoddy as so many of these stories are, they just put it out there and they just sweep it under the rug. And anytime that somebody raises a question, you have these people that are like, how dare you? How dare you question the narrative? How dare you, go against, what the Trump administration says or what the FBI says or whatever, because their team is in power, right? It's one of the most ridiculous things in the world. And these are the same people that tomorrow you'll talk to them and they'll complain or they'll complain about the investigative ability of the government. And they say, well, when the government investigates themselves, then like, obviously they're going to find nothing wrong. But then it's like when you start to question what your favorite person is telling you or their administration is telling you, whatever the case is, and it's not just specifically a Trump thing. I want this to be understood. It's any person or any side that's in the White House or any of the apparatuses, the FBI, CIA, whatever the case is, it doesn't matter. When you just ignore it and you look away or you just accept what the narrative is, you're doing a disservice to yourself. You're doing a disservice to your posterity. You are accepting the status quo and all of these different evolutions of what this becomes. All of these different amalgamations, right? So when we have issues, it's hard to keep track of a lot of these things. It's hard to stay on top of so many of these things because they change so quickly. And it's not because it's changing by the government. It's because there's new information coming out, or there's information that's being debunked, or there's information that's coming and going. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. The founders heavily implied and expected that we would be the preservationists of our republic. They heavily expected us to be active in the things that go on. Even if you're not a part of government, we have a fundamental role to play. And then to see people that talk about the founders and they pull a quote here and there off of whatever favorite founder they had or whatever the case is, and then they get upset when their fellow person raises questions. I don't believe it. You're using it as a crutch or like a faux cudgel in order to get your way. And that's not the way that it was intended. That's not who we are as Americans. So there's a lot more I could go on about, but I don't really want to beat this too much. Either way, we still have a lot of things that are standing out. We have to be very cautious about things that are going on abroad. We have to always question the motives. We have to question the policies, because a lot of these policies are being crafted by external entities, external countries, external alliances, again, which were repugnant to the founders. But I digress. I've beaten that ad nauseum at this point. And ultimately, when you have other countries that come in and they attempt to shape domestic policy, when they try to take our treasure, when they try to embolden us to send our people to fight their wars or fight their adversaries, and then you see so much of this come back home, and you see that over 20 plus years of using the cudgel method that has been proven to be totally destructive and yielding no results whatsoever, no positive results for the average American, and you see this mentality come back home and used on Americans, it should raise a red flag for people. So we have to be extremely trepidatious, whether they're issues at home, whether they're issues in the foreign policy or the international perspective or view. We have to be very, very careful about these, and we cannot be afraid to take a stand. And that being said, I think one of the best stands that you can take right now, something that you can immediately be involved in, is go check out Defend the Guard. Defend the Guard is a fundamental piece of legislation. It's a fundamental movement of helping the states retain their power against federal overreach, the usurpation of the state's National Guard, and preserving our National Guard and protecting it from unconstitutional and illegal wars. This gives states some of their power back. And if you want to make a difference, go to Defend the Guard, find Defend the Guard organizations in your states to help move this legislation along. It is overwhelmingly fundamental to who we are as a country, but it's so important if you care and if you want a place that you can start. This is one of the many places that you can go to. Go to defendtheguard.com, look and see what it's all about, do some reading, get knowledgeable about it, and then get involved. It's one of many, many things that you can do. It's notwithstanding that there's so many other wonderful organizations that are out there. I am a state representative of the American Liberty Caucus. I love the people that I work with. I love the people that I talk to and that I get to deal with on a fairly regular basis. And you have to come together and work with really good people that have a hunger to see things change, people that have an appetite for liberty, people that have an appetite for wanting to get things done and not just sitting there and talking about it, but actually trying to do something about it and working. And I want to remind you that in the end of the day, it doesn't mean you won't fail. You might fail once, you might fail twice, you might fail 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, but you got to get back up and you got to continue working. You might have to change. You might have to adapt certain things. You might have to be a little bit smarter, and you might have to go about it in a somewhat of a different way, but you have to be involved, bar none. So with that being said, I really, really appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to stop by the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I greatly appreciate the love and the support that you guys and gals bring. I really, I can't do it without you. And I'm going to hopefully be trying to normalize, my episodes once again. Things are still a little bit tumultuous on my end, but I'm working on it. And I'm also still trying to figure out all of the thumbnails and all of that. Hopefully we'll be back to situation normal before long. But without further ado, again, thank you so much for coming to the show tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear kind of my opinions and some of the things that I have to share. Educate yourselves, carry that torch of liberty to every place that you go, in your communities, in your homes, in your friends groups, whatever the case is. Carry liberty with you no matter where you go. And with that being said, I'm going to leave you guys and gals with a little bit of outro music this evening. So I hope that you enjoy. Give me 1 second here, and I'll see you on Saturday. Steel-clad fist, rise in the dark, shattered